I had lived for 35 years without ever imagining that a single family dinner could unravel the very foundation of my existence, shattering every deeply ingrained belief I had about love, loyalty, and the obligations of kinship. The soft flicker of candlelight danced along the polished mahogany of the dining table, casting elongated shadows against the walls, while the warm glow from the vintage chandelier overhead bathed the room in an inviting haze. The rich, savory aroma of my mother's signature stew curled through the air, thick and intoxicating, the kind of scent that, in my childhood, had signaled comfort and home. And yet tonight it suffocated me. It was a trap, carefully woven with the illusion of warmth, and I had walked into it without hesitation, naively believing, against all reason, that this time things would be different. The invitation had come 2 weeks prior, carried through the phone by my mother's voice, a tone so deceptively sweet that I should have recognized it for the siren song it was. "Sophia, you should come home for dinner. It's been so long since we all sat together as a family." I had hesitated then, lingering in the liminal space between duty and self-preservation. For over a decade, I had known the truth. My parents' love had always come with conditions, their affections doled out like carefully measured currency, granted only when there was something they wanted. And yet, despite everything, despite years of betrayal disguised as familial obligation, a part of me still yearned for something real, something untainted by the unspoken debts that had defined my relationship with them. Maybe this time, the invitation was sincere. Maybe they truly missed me. That fragile hope, so foolish and persistent, was what made me set aside my packed schedule in San Francisco, put my meetings and responsibilities on hold, and drive the 3 hours back to my childhood home in Sacramento, seeking something I already knew did not exist. I arrived with cautious optimism, forcing myself to ignore the faint prickle of unease that stirred in my chest the moment I stepped through the front door. The house looked the same, worn but well kept, the scent of polished wood and old memories hanging in the air. My father sat at the head of the table, silent as always, his presence more of a shadow than a force. My mother, ever the orchestrator, busied herself with last-minute preparations, her eyes flicking toward me with an unreadable expression. Across from me, my younger brother, Parker, leaned back in his chair, the ghost of a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. Beside him, my sister, Olivia, twirled a golden strand of hair around her manicured finger, her eyes glinting with something that looked dangerously close to triumph. I should have known then. The air was too thick, the tension coiled too tightly beneath the surface. But I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe so badly. And then, in the space of a few carefully rehearsed words, that belief was torn from me. To avoid any misunderstandings later, Mom and Dad want you to know now. Parker's voice was smooth, controlled, as though he had practiced delivering this particular line in front of a mirror. He adjusted his posture, settling into his seat with the kind of arrogance that comes from knowing you've already won. My mother sighed, feigning reluctance, though her gaze remained steady, her expression void of remorse. "Your father and I have finalized our will. This house, the lakefront villa in Tahoe, everything we own will go to Parker and Olivia." The words landed with the weight of 1,000 unspoken betrayals, slicing through the air with brutal efficiency. My fingers curled around the stem of my wine glass, tightening as though bracing against an unseen blow. For a moment, I could do nothing but stare. The walls of the house, once a backdrop of childhood memories, now felt as though they were closing in, suffocating me under the sheer enormity of what had just been said. My father, ever the passive spectator in my mother's decisions, said nothing, his gaze fixed downward, staring intently at the deep red swirl of wine in his glass, as though it held the answers to questions he refused to face. I took a slow breath, forcing steel into my spine, my voice deceptively calm when I finally spoke. "And why?" Parker shrugged, his tone thick with the kind of indulgent amusement that made my skin crawl. "Because you don't need it, right? You have your own company, your own house, a stable life. Mom and Dad think Olivia and I need the support more." I let out a short, disbelieving laugh, the sound sharp and humorless. "Support," I echoed, tasting the bitterness of the word on my tongue. "Olivia, you're 28 and haven't held a job for more than 6 months. Parker, how many times have you switched majors? 5? 6? And Mom and Dad have been paying for every single tuition fee, every failed attempt at ambition." My mother stiffened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Sophia, there's no need to overreact. Your father and I have thought this through. You don't need these assets, but Parker and Olivia do." A quiet fury coiled in my chest, simmering beneath my ribs, burning hotter with every passing second. I had spent the last decade pouring money into this house, into this family, covering bills, paying off their mortgage, funding repairs, sacrificing vacations, investments, moments of personal indulgence, all under the unspoken expectation that families supported each other. I had done it willingly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to, because I believed, foolishly, that my contributions meant something, that I meant something. And now, sitting at this table, surrounded by the people I had given everything to, I realized the brutal truth. They had never seen me as one of them. I was not their daughter. I was their benefactor. I exhaled slowly, setting my glass down with measured precision. "And what about the money I spent on all of you?" My voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it now, something razor sharp beneath the calm. "Does that count for nothing?" Olivia let out a soft, mocking chuckle. "Oh, so you were keeping track of every dollar? That's a little disappointing, Sophia. You're rich. Why are you being so stingy?" Stingy. The sheer audacity of it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. "Stingy," I repeated, the syllables coated in venom. "No, Olivia, this is called fraud. This is called exploitation." My mother slammed her palm onto the table, the sharp crack of flesh against wood ringing through the room. "Enough, Sophia! Stop acting like a victim. We did this not because we don't love you, but because we love all of our children." I stared at her, at my father, at Parker and Olivia, each of their faces etched with the same unyielding certainty, the same entitled expectation that I would accept this, that I would bow my head, bite my tongue, and continue playing my designated role. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I stood, pushing my chair back with slow, deliberate intent. "I've heard enough." My mother's eyes widened, her voice sharp. "What did you just say?" I met her gaze, unflinching. I said, "I'm done." And as I turned toward the door, leaving behind the house, the family, the lies, I felt something I had never felt before: freedom. The drive back to San Francisco was long and silent, the road stretching before me in an endless ribbon of asphalt, illuminated by the cold glow of streetlights. The city, with its familiar chaos and ceaseless motion, felt impossibly far away, a distant sanctuary I could not reach fast enough. My grip on the steering wheel was iron tight, my knuckles white, yet my mind was far from the present, tangled instead in the events that had just unfolded, the echoes of that dinner, the smirks, the indifference, the blatant betrayal reverberated through me like an aftershock, shaking loose old illusions I had spent years patching together. I had always known deep down that my place in that family was conditional, that my worth was measured not by love but by utility. And yet, even knowing that, some desperate part of me had still hoped for something different. That hope was now dead, buried beneath the weight of their final rejection, and in its place something colder took root. Not sadness, not despair, just the sharp clarity of understanding. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. The weight of the evening, of years of sacrifice reduced to nothing, pressed down on my shoulders, threatening to crush me. I moved through my home on autopilot, discarding my coat, my bag, my heels, before finally sinking onto the couch with a deep, heavy sigh. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the city beyond my windows, a stark contrast to the chaos still raging in my mind. I reached for my phone out of habit, scrolling mindlessly, but the moment my banking app caught my eye, a new wave of bitterness surged through me. Without thinking, I opened it, my fingers moving swiftly, navigating through the long list of recurring payments that had become as routine as breathing. Mortgage payments, utility bills, transfers to my mother's account. Grocery expenses I had been covering for Olivia and Parker for years. A relentless stream of transactions, each one a silent, unquestioned offering to a family that had never once considered returning the favor. For years, I had accepted it. For years, I had convinced myself that it was just what family did, that my success meant I had a duty to support them, to ensure they were taken care of. But sitting here now, in the dim light of my apartment, the truth settled over me like a final, unshakable verdict. They had never seen it that way. They had never looked at me as their daughter, their sister, a part of something whole. To them, I had been a resource, a lifeline, an ATM with a beating heart. And the moment they no longer needed me, the moment they had secured their future without me in it, they had cut me off without hesitation, without regret. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, my pulse thrumming in my ears as my thumb hovered over the screen. Then, with a final exhale, I pressed Cancel Recurring Payments. A notification flashed across the screen, successfully canceled. The weight lifted immediately, the relief so sudden and unfamiliar that I almost laughed. It felt like severing an invisible chain that had bound me for years, a quiet but monumental act of reclaiming something I had never realized I had lost, control. But I knew, even before the screen had dimmed, that they would not let this go. The first call came the next morning. My mother's name flashed across my screen, her persistence as predictable as the sunrise. I ignored it. Then came the second call, the third, the fourth. By the fifth, I silenced my phone, letting it slip to voicemail as I sipped my coffee, watching the morning light filter through the kitchen window. Moments later, the first message arrived. Mom, Sophia, I can't believe you did this. Do you have any idea how much the house is struggling? I set my cup down, exhaling slowly. Mom, don't be so selfish. Family is supposed to help each other. A hollow laugh escaped my lips. Family. That word had never felt more meaningless. The messages kept coming, a steady barrage of guilt and expectation wrapped in thinly veiled demands. By noon, my father had joined in. Dad, Sophia, you need to reconsider. Your mother is very upset. You can't just cut ties over a small misunderstanding. We're family. A small misunderstanding. That was what they called it. Decades of taking, of dismissing me, of stripping me of everything but obligation, and they reduced it to a small misunderstanding. I let the message sit unread, untouched, allowing their words to fade into the void where they belonged. Then, inevitably, Olivia called. I declined without hesitation. A second later, her texts followed. Olivia, absolutely pathetic, Sophia. You're such a petty and selfish person. Olivia, do you really think you're better than us? If you didn't want to help, you should have just said so instead of pretending to be the good one. Olivia, you've destroyed this family. Congratulations. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. I read each word with a growing sense of detachment. The anger that had burned so fiercely the night before, now replaced with something colder, something immovable. They truly believed I was the villain. They truly believed I owed them, that my refusal to be exploited made me cruel, and they would never see it any other way. That realization should have hurt, but instead it only solidified what I already knew. I had never been one of them. Not really. Then, just as I thought their tantrum had reached its peak, Parker called. Unlike Olivia, he didn't resort to passive-aggressive messages. No, Parker was always direct, always bold in his entitlement. And maybe, just maybe, a part of me wanted to hear what he had to say. Answered, my voice flat, emotionless. "What, Parker?" His voice was sharp, biting. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Taking back what's mine." A bitter laugh echoed through the receiver. "You're disgusting, Sophia. You cut off support for Mom and Dad just because they didn't leave you an inheritance? You're nothing but a greedy leech." I let his words settle, absorbing them, tasting their bitterness before responding with the same unwavering coldness. "This isn't about money, Parker. It's about respect, something I never got from any of you." "You're a venomous snake," he spat. "You think you can abandon this family without consequences? Just wait." And then, before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at my phone, my grip tightening until my knuckles ached. He wanted to threaten me. He wanted to intimidate me. But he had underestimated one thing. I was no longer afraid of them. One by one, I scrolled through my contacts, my finger hovering over each name. Mom, Dad, Olivia, Parker. And then, with a final, resolute breath, I pressed block. Their names faded into nothingness, disappearing from my screen, from my life. For the first time in years, I felt peace. For the first time in my life, I knew silence. Not the suffocating kind, not the heavy, oppressive quiet of being unseen in a house full of people who only acknowledged me when it was convenient, but a silence that felt like freedom. No more phone calls, no more guilt-ridden messages, no more demands disguised as love, just the steady hum of my own existence, uninterrupted. In the weeks that followed, I found myself waking up with an unfamiliar lightness, a strange absence of weight pressing against my chest. My phone no longer felt like a tether, vibrating with relentless expectations, and I no longer flinched at the sight of an incoming call, waiting for another accusation, another demand for money, another reminder that in their eyes, I was nothing more than a means to an end. It was over. At first, the quiet was disorienting. It was strange, realizing that I had spent so many years reacting, constantly bracing for the next request, the next guilt trip, the next crisis that I would inevitably be expected to solve. I had built my life around that role, the provider, the responsible one, the daughter who could be counted on to keep everything afloat, even as the ones who benefited from my sacrifices took and took without hesitation. Now, for the first time, there was nothing, just me. The realization was as liberating as it was unsettling. I had always been surrounded by noise, whether it was my mother's passive-aggressive sighs, my father's resigned silences, Parker's entitled demands, or Olivia's cutting remarks. But without them, there was peace. And in that peace, I began to understand something that had eluded me for years. I had never truly lived for myself. I threw myself into work, into projects I had always put off, into ideas I had pushed aside in favor of financial stability. With no one leeching from me, my money became my own again, and I found an odd satisfaction in watching my accounts grow, unburdened by endless withdrawals. I took a photography class, something I had always wanted to do but never found the time for, and spent weekends wandering through the city, capturing moments of quiet beauty that had once gone unnoticed in the chaos of obligation. I traveled. Paris, Tokyo, Machu Picchu, places I had dreamed of visiting but had always postponed, always telling myself there were more important things, more pressing responsibilities. But now, there was nothing stopping me. I stood on the cliffs of Santorini, watching the sun dip into the Aegean Sea, the sky painted in brilliant hues of orange and gold, and I realized that for the first time I was free, truly irrevocably free. But freedom, I soon discovered, did not mean they were gone. No, my absence had not gone unnoticed, and if there was one thing I had learned about my family, it was that they did not handle losing control well. It started subtly, a distant cousin reaching out through Facebook, a message dripping with concern and carefully veiled judgment. "Sophia, I heard what happened with your family. Are you okay? I know your mother is really struggling right now. Maybe you should talk to her." I ignored it, but then came another. "Sophia, I don't know the full story, but family is family. You shouldn't let money come between you." And then another. "Your parents are going through a hard time. Just think about it." The pattern was familiar. My mother, unable to sway me directly, had turned to manipulation, casting herself as the wounded matriarch, abandoned by the ungrateful daughter who had forsaken her own blood over money. The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. They weren't struggling. They weren't on the verge of losing their home. The only thing they had lost was access to my bank account. And yet, the narrative they spun painted them as victims, as aging parents left destitute by a selfish, heartless daughter who had forgotten where she came from. They wanted to guilt me, to shame me back into compliance. But what they failed to realize was that I was no longer the woman they could manipulate. I had seen the truth, and once seen, it could never be unseen. So I did something I never would have done before. I told my side of the story, not through whispers, not through back and forth arguments, but through something far more powerful: the truth. I sat down one evening, opened my laptop, and let my fingers fly across the keyboard, weaving together the reality they had so desperately tried to bury. I tried to be a good daughter. For over a decade, I paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to support my parents, to cover their mortgage, their bills, their expenses. I put my own dreams on hold, believing that family meant sacrifice, that my success meant I had a duty to help them. And yet, when my parents finalized their will, they left me with nothing, giving everything to my siblings because, in their words, I didn't need it. When I protested, I was called selfish. When I stopped financing them, I was called a traitor. And now they are spreading lies, claiming that I abandoned them, that they are struggling, when in truth, the only thing they have lost is the free financial support I once provided. I am sharing this not for sympathy, but for those who have been in my position, who have been used, drained, and discarded by the very people who were supposed to love them. Setting boundaries is not betrayal. Refusing to be exploited is not cruelty. Sometimes, the hardest thing you will ever do is walk away. But sometimes, it is the only way to survive. I posted it without hesitation, without regret, and within hours, it spread. The comments flooded in, some supportive, some critical, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that they could no longer control the story. For years, they had held the power, shaping the narrative to fit their version of reality, but now that power was gone, and they knew it. The next day, my mother called. I didn't answer. She called again and again, until finally she left a voicemail, her voice trembling with fury barely masked by forced concern. "Sophia, what the hell are you doing? You are humiliating this family. You think strangers on the internet matter more than your own blood? You will regret this." No, I thought. You will. 3 months passed, then 6. The silence stretched on, and with each passing day, I felt lighter, stronger. The messages from distant relatives stopped. The desperate attempts at guilt faded. My mother, my father, Parker, Olivia, one by one, they vanished from my world, not because I had erased them, but because, without my financial support, I had never truly existed to them in the first place. And then, 1 year later, something unexpected happened. I met Alex. I hadn't been looking for love. I hadn't even considered it. But he arrived in my life like a quiet force, steady and patient, expecting nothing, demanding nothing. He wasn't like the people I had known before. He saw me not as a provider, not as a resource, but as a person. With him, there was no expectation, no hidden agenda, no price to pay for affection. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be loved without condition. Standing on my balcony one crisp December evening, watching the city lights stretch endlessly before me, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. I had lost a family, but I had gained something far greater: myself. I had spent years believing that love was something to be earned, that my worth was tied to how much I could give, how much I could sacrifice. But the truth was far simpler. I had never needed their love. I had only ever needed my own. And now I had it. I was free.